disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. So I just want to take a second to highlight something that was recently reported by Rebel News. Now, Rebel News in particular, I don't always agree with everything that they state. There's some things that I think they don't report on necessarily, but there's things that, you give credit where credit's due. And I think Rebel News, when talking about right now, they're talking about the temporary foreign worker program, which we have talked extensively on this channel about, that it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up to the fact that, the current unemployment situation in this country is over 7% of the nation, and the youth is being the majority of it. Majority of the youth population of Canada cannot find jobs. They cannot find work. They're not being hired. They're not given the opportunity. And it's the worst it's ever been in decades. Meanwhile, we have politicians, inside Parliament, inside the provincial offices that are giving clearance and amnesty to migrants coming in to basically take over those jobs. And I'm not saying the migrants are stealing those positions, but I'm saying that they're giving the opportunity to companies and corporations to exploit the newcomers and use them for cheap labor. So Rebel News put this little thing together, and I just want to show people this for a bit. It's a fairly lengthy video, so we're not going to show all of it, but here is one of the reporter, David Menzies, who's been arrested numerous times. I just want to point that out. Again, I don't agree with everything this corporation necessarily responds to and highlight. They have very questionable takes when it comes to discussing foreign affairs, but I give credit where credit's due, and this particular piece was very interesting, so take a look.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in North Toronto. And folks, one of the marketing slogans for Tim Hortons is, you've always got time for Tim Hortons, but the question now is, does Tim Hortons have time, or for that matter, any inclination for hiring Canadians, rather? Why has Tim Hortons seemingly betrayed Canada? They say they are Canada's official coffee, but why is it a bit of a stretch these days to hire Canadians to serve that coffee? Why are they increasingly reliant on temporary foreign workers to fill positions? And we're at this Tim Hortons at the corner of Yonge and Lawrence. And it's because in the Government of Canada Job Bank, this particular Tim Hortons, we believe, going by area code, posted an ad for a manager. They were offering $36 an hour. That's not bad in the food service business. And basically the premise is they can't find a Canadian citizen to take a job at $36 an hour.
So I keep hearing these claims. I keep hearing the claims that, no one wants to work, or they put out ads and no one responds to them. And, oh, these people are just so greedy. They're lazy. It's all these Gen Z and millennials. They're just too lazy to work. As you heard there, for $36 an hour for a manager position at a fast food chain, that's pretty hard. That's pretty hard to ignore. That I can't see anybody trying to skip that opportunity. And considering that a lot of people, especially younger people, that just want the experience, they want the opportunity. That's the whole point of getting, that first job. You may not like working in a fast food industry or cleaning garbage or janitorial or whatever the place may be, but the whole point is experience. You have to earn experience. You have to put yourself out there for other companies to look at you and say, okay, you have work ethic, you have experience, you have the ability to work at a facility in the industry. So for $36 an hour, I can't see no Canadian passing that up. And, thanks to shows like Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, we know that people will do anything if the price is right. People will do any job, no matter how disgusting, no matter how depraving, if they are treated with dignity, respect, and are treated as an actual dignified human being, meaning that they're, paid a decent wage, they get benefits, if they want to unionize, they're able to do so, they're able to gather their workers, and they don't feel the pressure by large entities and corporate, stakeholders cracking down on them. But why are no Canadians allowed to apply for this job? Well, here's what he says.
An hour for managing a coffee shop, so they have to look abroad. Now, personally, I'm not buying that. I think this is all a scam to hire cheap foreign workers to replace Canadian workers. And given that Tim Hortons is the #1 food service chain in Canada, it's not exactly as though they're foraging for nickels and dimes, is it? And by the way, folks, let me point to our truck. We've launched our most recent campaign. Please go to hirecanadiansfirst.com. That's hirecanadiansfirst.com. You know, Tim Hortons bases its entire legacy on one of the greatest NHL players of all time. That would be Tim Horton himself, of course. And yet that Northern Ontario boy, if he were to apply for a job here, well, he'd be persona non grata. They would rather somebody from across the ocean to fill that position. Now, we always reach out for the other side of the story. We're going to go in here and ask if we can speak to a manager or maybe even the franchise owner, if he or she is here, and simply ask them, at a job paying $36 an hour, really? You couldn't find a Canadian here in North Toronto to take that wage, to take that position? Again, I'm very skeptical that's the case. I think this is all about cheaper workers, compliant workers, workers that won't rock the boat, and obviously big multinationals. And by the way, Tim Hortons is not a Canadian company anymore. It is part of Restaurant Brands International, a huge multinational. And so again, their agenda has very little to do with Canadiana. So
a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. And I want to highlight that specifically because this is part of the problem. This is part of the problem. And not just with the temporary foreign workers, not just with the fact that they're completely ignoring the ability to hire Canadians and resorting to cheap labor, which the UN has even called out this country for abusing temporary foreign workers as contemporaries to modern-day slavery. But not only that, we have seen Tim Hortons, the food quality has dropped drastically. The locations. I remember a time when you went to a Tim Hortons location and you knew you were at Tim Hortons. Remember when they used to have actual plates? Remember they actually gave you coffee right in the actual mug? You actually got a ceramic mug. You sat at the table. They gave you a plate. They gave you real customer service. You knew you felt you were at a Tim Hortons. There was some sort of essence to a restaurant. Just like when you used to go to McDonald's and you see the golden arches, the big red roof. They used to have the playroom for the kids. You knew you were at McDonald's. But because of these large entities, these large private equity firms buying out these chains and monopolizing on the fast food industry, they are sucking out the essence that individualizes these chains so that when you walk into a Tim Hortons, it looks less like a Tim Hortons and more like, I don't know, like you would see probably in Starbucks, or the same thing you'd see at Burger King, or the same thing you see at McDonald's. They do that intentionally. They do that intentionally. They take out the essence. They take out, what makes it significant and make it as bland as possible so that if by anything, Tim Hortons, that location goes under or gets sold out or whatever the case may be, or someone buys the land, because that's really what it is. It's about the land opportunity, that they can now resort to that location. And it doesn't have to be a Tim Hortons. It could be, a shoe store. It could be designer jeans. It could be a vape shop for all we know, because they just transform an iconic building, an iconic restaurant, the brand that people grew up with and love and pay patriotism to, is completely being hollowed out. So that is, a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't understand that. They still think that Tim Hortons is still this, Canadian proud chain. And especially the people with the elbows up crowd. It baffles me that, the elbows up crowd, that they're chanting, buy Canadian, we gotta stop America, rah, rah, Mark Carney's great, Donald Trump's evil. And then they get their coffee from Tim Hortons, they're shopping at Walmart, they're, going outside their way to be the opposite of supporting Canadian. Like, you're supporting a private equity firm that bought Tim Hortons. You're supporting Walmart that the Walmart family lives in Wyoming, not Canada. It's not a Canadian brand. Walmart is from the United States. So it's fascinating that people, that claim to be, up in arms and, very, very pungent on, supporting Canadian identity and Canadian jobs in the industries don't see this. They don't see this. So here is, we showed this before, but I just want to highlight again. So here's Ezra Levant of Rebel News speaking directly to Pierre Poilievre about the temporary foreign worker program, because the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre and Michelle Rampart, are coming out to investigate the temporary foreign worker program, the abuses, the atrocities, the fact that we are, kind of harboring people into contemporary slavery as the UN states. That the fact that we're not hiring Canadians, the fact that we're not going out to our ways to actually supporting the country and the individuals that form and shape this country, that we're resorting to, people across the pond that we're bringing over here, that we're almost like human trafficking to take over these positions that you don't want to hire Canadians for. So there needs to be investigation. And here's Ezra Levant speaking to Pierre Poilievre, asking directly, are you willing to call out and shame these companies that are exploiting? Because again, it's not about the migrant. It's not about the immigrant themselves. They didn't steal your job. The company took it away from you and gave the opportunity to someone else. So the company is at fault here, not the migrant, not the immigrant, because they're just the ones, just like you and I, just like anyone else there, that are just trying to survive and make a buck. That's what it's really about. But here's what went down.
Hi, Ezra Levant from Rebel News. I thought it was very interesting about Booster Juice paying $36 an hour to a foreign worker. And I think a lot of Canadians don't know how pervasive this is, and that's an outrageous anecdote. I don't think the Liberals are going to accept your advice here, so I think your reforms wouldn't be able to bite until you become Prime Minister if that happens. But I think there is something you could do in the meantime. And let me ask you if you would consider this. I'm actually just doing some brainstorming here. Would you consider shining a spotlight using your bully pulpit on the worst offenders? For example, maybe a company that really wraps itself in the Canadian flag, like Tim Hortons. Would you consider having an event outside of Tim Hortons? Would you consider writing to the board of directors of RBI and the Brazilian hedge fund? And I guess what I'm saying is, there's no downside to these companies hiring foreign workers. But if there was a PR downside, if patriotic Canadians said, this is enough. I notice in the UK there's a lot of people waving British and English flags. It's their response to immigration crises. Would you consider naming and shaming in the public domain abusers of the TFW program?
Yes. And thank you for the question. Michelle Rempel has already begun the process. She's been publishing the most egregious cases of corporate elites profiting by shutting Canadians out of jobs in favor of low-wage temporary foreign workers. And Michelle, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure.
Come on over.
No, thanks for the question, Ezra. It's absolutely egregious that these companies expect that they can just maximize corporate profits on the backs of and at the expense of Canadian youth. It's a practice that has to end. We've been naming and shaming them all week. I want to thank my team for finding those examples, but I encourage Canadians to go and look for themselves. There's been websites that have been set up so that people can see what these companies are doing. But the more important thing is, Ezra, that the Liberals are letting them do this. The Liberals are totally letting them do this. You know, Lena Diab, where was she this summer, the immigration minister? Did she name and shame any of these people? No, she didn't. And that's why we're here today. We're standing up for the people that are behind us. Enough is enough. Canadian jobs have to go to Canadians.
So that was pretty interesting. And it's also just shocking that, again, you would think this would be like a Liberal position. This would be a left-wing position, that you're going and shaming the companies that are purposely exploiting for cheap labor and ignoring the pleas of Canadians that are willing to work for a decent wage. Like, that seems like a left-wing position. That's something I agree with. But the Liberal Party, because they are the ruling party and been the ruling party for over a decade now, and I would even throw a bit of the Conservatives under this, because under Stephen Harper, the temporary foreign worker program kind of escalated, but it wasn't to the extremity that we saw with Justin Trudeau, and we're going to get into later on. It just seems crazy that the Conservatives, the Pierre Poilievre and Michelle Rempel, are the only two people I know that are even mentioning about this in kind of the mainstream, political discourse. And Jamal Giovanni, I got to add too, because he was one of the first MPs to really call this out. But it's amazing. It's amazing. And while people demonize Pierre Poilievre as some sort of extreme far-right, conspiracy nut, or, a maple MAGA, as Chrystia Freeland would like to say, stating that jobs should, be considered for Canadians first before we resort to temporary foreign workers, that sounds like a left-wing position. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems like a more left-wing, kind of anti-corporate, kind of pro-worker, almost on the keen lines of socialism there, that, hey, we got to expose what the free market is doing and exploiting these migrants for cheap labor. Like, that sounds like a left-wing position, and has to come out of Pierre Poilievre. And they still want to deem him as some sort of right-wing extremist. Why? Because he doesn't fit the mold. He doesn't fit the corporate, globalist, neoliberal agenda bubble that is plagued upon Parliament. And that's why we're in this mess. That's why we're in this catastrophe that still continues on. So here is some examples. This is from Toronto Star. What I experienced in Canada is inhumane. Amnesty report exposes abuse, exploitation of migrants under temporary foreign worker program. So they're purposely exploiting newcomers into the country. And obviously they're trying to get newcomers to take these positions, bribe them and say, hey, we're going to pay you, $36 an hour. They'll take it because they're new. They won't understand that they're just looking for a job. They're looking for a way out. They're looking for, means of survival, just like anyone else. And then once they get hired on, they don't realize that, oh, well, because you're a newcomer, the laws say we don't have to actually pay you this much. You're a temporary foreign worker. We don't actually have to abide by Canadian Labor Board's, numbers and laws and legislation, because you're not a citizen. So we don't have to abide. We don't have to pay you $36 for a manager position. We don't have to pay you the money that we advertise in our job posting and stuff like that. That's why. That's why they're doing this. Here's United Nations. They came forward. They had a special rapporteur to personally call out Canada. And that's big because the UN never rarely highlights Canada for any of their atrocities. Rarely highlights Canada. But UN experts sound alarm over contemporary forms of slavery in Canada. Why? Because we're exploiting migrants. We're influxing mass immigration to bring in low-skill, low-wage workers to replace the Canadian workforce. That is a form of slavery. And I know this because the people that are coming in and being exploited and being propped up by saying, hey, we're going to, give you a good job, we're going to give you housing, we're going to do this, they're getting thrown under the bus. So Canadians are getting thrown under the bus. The migrants themselves are getting thrown under the bus. And the people that are laughing to the bank on this is the corporate estate. The people that run Tim Hortons, the people that run Burger King, the people that run McDonald's, these private equity firms that do not care about the restaurant. They don't care about the quality of service. They don't care about the food. They don't care about if customer satisfaction is good or not. They're looking to buy these assets so they can have more in their portfolio. And if a restaurant goes under, oh, too bad. We have the land that it sits on, and we could sell it off to someone else. Or we could just take one of our other assets and place it in there. That's why all the buildings now for fast food chains look very bland. Have you ever noticed that? It looks less iconic and more like a hospital cafeteria. Is that, does that scream, that kind of feeling you used to get when you go to these certain restaurants? I mean, look at what they did. Look at what they did to Cracker Barrel, or tried to do. They tried to rebrand it. They tried to, remodel it. They took the very essence of the Southern kind of charm that Cracker Barrel was inspired and Cracker Barrel is iconic for. They took it away from the general public purposely, because private equity wants to suck out the essence of these iconic brands and utilize that particular location for whatever their agenda is. So, here, for example, Ezra mentioned about Restaurant Brands International. These are the people that run Tim Hortons. This is not a Canadian company. This is no longer a Canadian brand. And Restaurant Brands International, one of the world's largest quick service restaurant companies with nearly $45 billion in annual system-wide sales, and over 32,000 restaurants in more than 120 countries and territories. So, I just want to show people. So, Restaurant Brands International, there's Tim Hortons there that they bought out back in, I think, 2016 or 2015. Can't remember the exact date when they announced it. So, there's Tim Hortons, but they also own Burger King or Popeyes and Firehouse Subs. And if you've been to these locations, you notice, well, Tim Hortons is not the only one guilty of temporary foreign labor, of, the food quality decreasing, of customer service lacking, that it almost seems like a trend. It almost seems like this conglomeracy, this Restaurant Brands International, is telling Tim Hortons, Burger King, Popeyes, Firehouse, and others, hey, we want to make a quick buck. We don't care about food. We don't care about restaurants. We're not in this for the restaurant opportunity. We're here to make money. And the only way to make money is to trick people by giving you shitty food. Customers pay for it. They get dissatisfied. But hey, they'll be angry at the migrants. They'll be angry at the temporary foreign workers, not the company itself. Here's also, this is a little statistic here. So, global store counts across brand by countries and territories. This is from their investment page on their website. You can go check this out for yourself. So, in total, they break it down here. Over 6,000 Tim Hortons locations worldwide. 19,000 Burger King locations worldwide. Popeyes, 4,000. Firehouse Subs, over 1,000. Over 32,000 in total that this one particular entity owns worldwide. And the people responsible for the decisions, like this guy, Joshua Koza, is that how you say it? Kobza? Maybe it's Kobza. He is the chief executive officer. And if you read a little bit of the background here, let's bring this up. It says Josh Kobza was appointed as RBI's chief executive officer in March of 2023 and previously served as chief operating officer since January of 2019. In his previous roles at the company, Mr. Kobza served as chief technology officer and development officer from January 2018 to 2019 of January, and chief financial officer from December 2014 to January 2018. Mr. Kobza was the executive vice president and chief financial officer of Burger King Worldwide. Mr. Kobza originally joined Burger King Worldwide in June of 2012 as director of investment relations and was promoted to senior vice president global finance in December of 2012. Prior to joining RBI, Mr. Kobza worked at SIP Capital, a Sao Paulo base private investment firm where he elevated investments across a number of industries and geographies. He also served as an analyst in the corporate private equity area. Anytime I hear the word corporate private equity, those three words slumped together, that should be worrisome. A corporate private equity stake at Tim Hortons, at Burger King, at McDonald's, at Cracker Barrel, at Eastside Mario's, at whatever the place may be. When you hear those three words slapped together, that's when you know there's real trickery up front, ladies and gentlemen, that these people could not care less about the service. They could not care less about the industry. If they buy a restaurant, they don't care about the food. If they buy a grocery store chain, they don't care about the customers. If they buy a chain of bookstores, they don't care about reading. They care about the money. They care about the equity. They care about making capital off of these locations. And he is the corporate private equity area of Blackstone Group in New York City. You know, the company, the private equity firm that's buying up all the housing, the rental properties in New York City, which is why renting a place in New York is like an arm and a leg. Those are the people that are now running a place like Tim Hortons, a Canadian brand. They still want to disguise themselves as a Canadian brand. You know, get Ryan Reynolds to promote their scrambled egg mix, or Tim Biebs. Oh, we got some Canadian figures. You gotta like us. You gotta like us. Mr. Kabza is based out of RBI's headquarters in Miami, Florida. In Miami, Florida. So I just want to remind people, especially the elbows up crowd, you know, the people that want to purchase Canadian goods and Canadian services, just know Tim Hortons should be on your don't list. Because specifically, they are refusing to hire Canadians. They are a private equity firm, a multinational corporation that has nothing to do with Canada whatsoever. And that's why the food is terrible. That's why the service is lacking. And that's why a lot of these locations are just sucking out the essence of what Tim Hortons, the iconic brand, used to be. But did you know, this is Riley Donovan, 67% of Canadians still think Tim Hortons is Canadian. In 2014, Tim Hortons merged with Burger King to form Restaurant Brands International. A Brazilian investment firm called 3G Capital owns the largest stake. So 2014, I remember 2014, Tim Hortons merged with Burger King. They made this private equity firm to manage these fast food chains, but another private equity firm in Brazil has a majority stake in this firm. So, talk about the lacking of a Canadian brand when you have two multinational entities buying you out. And here, it shows a graphic here from Abacus Data, and you can see there, Tim Hortons at 67%. Do you think the following companies or brands are Canadian or American? 67% still think Tim Hortons is Canadian. Boston Pizza, 41%. Molson Brewery at 68%. Dollarama at 57%. But when you actually look in the details, when you actually go and research specifically these companies, and you think, oh, wait a second, are they actually Canadian? You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of actual Canadian owned and operated companies left. Because as we've seen, and now even more so with Mark Carney, the private equity prime minister running the country, that they are purposely exploiting the nation. They're exploiting the people. They're exploiting our economy and hollowing out our, trusted industries and our reliable sources to multinational giants, and completely diminishing the very opportunity that Canada could be receiving that Canada could actually, triumph and actually build upon on, and we wouldn't have the disaster that we're in right now. And this has been going on for many years. Many years. So here, remember Minister Mark Miller? This guy here? This is the guy responsible for mass migration during Justin Trudeau's reign. And remember, he was on CBC News because this is the moment when people started to wake up and realize, hey, why are we importing so many people to take jobs from Canadians? And specifically at the highest point during COVID lockdowns. That was the thing that really ticked me off, was you told people, the government told people to shut everything down. Shut your businesses down. Mom and pop restaurants can't operate. Grocery stores can only, be a certain amount of people. You can't do this. You can't do that. If you have a home business, you have to shut that down. Your livelihoods got destroyed. But they're going to bring in a bunch of migrants from foreign countries, give them immediate visas and sponsorship to take over the positions that you got laid off from because of COVID. And why was that the case? Well, here's Mark Miller about to explain this to you on CBC Radio.
Is this change an admission by the federal government that what's been going on over the past few years hasn't worked? That we've been oversubscribed essentially?
Well, I think it is worth examining what has worked and what hasn't worked. We do have our share of responsibility federally. Immigration is a shared jurisdiction, and we own a lot of the increase that I think was important to prevent the economy from going into the recession and the growth that we've had, which has almost entirely been.
That's it. That's it. We got to do this. We have to do this for ourselves. We have to do this because the economy was going to crash. We were going to end into a recession. Well, thank God. It's not like we're in a recession right now and there's still mass migration coming into the country. Thank God. Thank God they caught it in time. We're doing this for ourselves because if we don't, oh my God, the economy is going to crash. It's not like we told people they were going to lose their jobs because this virus was going to come in and we told them get, laid off, or if you can't, get yourself jabbed, you won't have a position, blah, 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 and bring in people to stab more Canadians in the back. It's not like we did that. It was about the economy. It was about avoiding a recession. As we're in a recession right now. And we have been in a recession for a couple, months now. I would even say a couple years now that we've been growing into a recession. But someone like Mark Miller or Justin Trudeau or even Mark Carney right now is refusing to admit it. Refusing to admit their wrongdoings.
Due to immigration. That's come with what the Bank of Canada has said is a conundrum, what economists have said is a conundrum on services, on the ability of provinces to adapt. And so it is a collective effort by the federal government, by provinces, in this case BC, and by municipalities to adapt to larger numbers. And so that listening exercise over the last year has been significant, and I think it was clear to me that it was important to reduce not only temporary residents, international students, like we've been doing over the last year, but also on the permanent levels to make them more manageable. And I think that, yes, is absolutely our response.
So what he's stating there, it's not we are going to actually hold account to a failing system that's pouring in these people and listening to, border security and listening to the whistleblowers that have called it out. He's not addressing that. He's saying that it's our duty to manage the fact that they're pouring in people. And he's shaming provinces and territories and communities all across Canada. Hey, you guys have to adapt to the impouring of immigrants and migrants pouring into your communities. I don't want to hear your bitching about it. I don't want to hear how hospitals can't maintain because there's an influx of the population and services are questionable because you're influxing the population at such a sharp rate. I don't want to hear about that. You have to adapt. That's what this guy is saying. You have to adapt to the mass migration. You have to deal with it. Shut up and deal with it. It's not our fault. It's not our fault, but it's the collective fault of the provinces, of communities, of you guys out there. You guys have to deal with this for our wrongdoings, for the fact that Mark Miller is a complete hack. And he's not there for the sustainability of Canada. He's there for the sustainability of his job. Because no doubt the Parliament is owned and occupied by a lot of these lobby groups and NGOs and billionaires that collaborate, much like the United States, much like anywhere else in the world, and are allowing for this open door migration without any checks and balances, without proper jurisdiction, without any legal checkpoints that many people had to go through. And that's why a bunch of legal migrants are even upset about this, because they had to go through the system. They know how chaotic it is, but they know and understand why it's important. As opposed to getting someone really off the boat, bring them into Canada, and then just pass the baton of working at Tim Hortons from an eligible Canadian or a younger Canadian off to this newcomer that may not speak English, that doesn't understand our laws, our ways, our culture. They may not even have experience of running a coffee machine, but we're offering them a position before Canadians. It doesn't make sense unless you're that massively corrupted. Here's table salt stating, breaking on March 4th, 2025, in the final days of the Trudeau government, Mark Miller, then Minister of Immigration, quietly signed an order making it easier for employers to hire temporary foreign workers already in Canada without needing a permit. So the guy that's saying, oh, collectively we feel at fault, and I think we need to reflect on this, he once again stabbed Canada in the back by legislating and allowing these companies to further get temporary foreign workers effective after the election. So they were waiting for Mark Carney to be selected as Prime Minister so they could continue on this catastrophe. And it's not good for Canadians. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for the migrants. But the corporations love it. They love it. Private equity firms are jumping in joy. I'm surprised that there's not more investment in Canada, considering that we're exploiting Canadians or exploiting migrants, and private equity firms are getting a huge amount of buck with this transformation. And did you know in 2013, Brian Lilly pointed this out, in 2013, when Mark Carney, before he was Prime Minister, being the Governor of the Bank of Canada, he called out temporary foreign workers. He called out the program. So did Justin Trudeau before he got in the position of power. And Mark Carney, this is what, in 2013, this is what he said in the House of Commons under Stephen Harper.
That one doesn't want an over-reliance, certainly on temporary foreign workers for lower-skilled jobs, which prevent the wage adjustment mechanism from both improving, making sure that Canadians are paid higher wages, but also that the firms improve their productivity as is necessary. So we don't want to mask it, and as the government's review and as the intent of the review to ensure that this is used for transition for those higher-skilled gaps that do exist and
So he's telling the Canadian government and companies to not be reliant or overly reliant on temporary foreign workers. So he's warning people back in 2013 when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. Now that he's Prime Minister, now that he has full control of the country, he has completely changed. He's completely done a complete 180. Why? Because in the time that he was the governor of the Bank of Canada, he was also the governor of the Bank of England, and he was also working at Brookfield, another private equity firm. Private equity firms love exploitive temporary foreign workers. They love it. They love cheap labor. They want to cut costs as much from the bottom as possible. And now, Mark Carney being prime minister in that position, working for his buddies, because he knows he surrounds himself with his lobbyists from Brookfield, from the Citizen NGO, and other multinational entities. Here's him. This is Mark Nixon saying Canada has lost over 100,000 plus jobs in 2 months. The national unemployment is over 7%, majority being young Canadians. 48 hours ago, Mark Carney said we need more temporary foreign workers. This isn't a government. This is a clown show under a collapsing tent. So Mark Carney in 2013 said we shouldn't be over-reliant, and now here he is contradicting his former self.
Issue is access to temporary foreign workers. OK? Et pour le moment, c'est une des grandes demandes du gouvernement.
So he said, I don't have the full clip there, but he said prior that businesses in Canada are worried about two things. They're worried about tariffs, and they're worried about access to temporary foreign workers. Because apparently Canadians cannot do these jobs. Canadians cannot do these jobs. And I've even seen, a lot of boomers out there, a lot of people, the CBC watchers and whatnot, that, will go on the fence and say, well, they're doing the jobs that, Canadians won't do, like picking, berries in a field. You expect young people to do that? Young people are so lazy. Working at fast food chains. Obviously, young people don't want to do that. So, yeah, temporary foreign workers, I don't understand what they're saying, and they're crazy and they're nuts, but young people are even more stupid. Blah, 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 blah. First of all, that's very, very ignorant. And I would say almost racist. It's like when Kelly Osbourne was on The View and made that statement about, Trump, making criticism about the immigration policies in the United States. And Kelly Osbourne stated, well, Mr. Trump, if you're going to crack down on migrants, who's going to clean your toilets? It's that kind of rhetoric that's kind of disgusting. Like, you're telling me that only a certain race of people can clean toilets. Again, we understand that anyone can do anything. Look at dirty jobs. Look at what Mike Rowe showed us over the years. Anyone will do any job if they're treated with dignity, if they're treated with respect, and they get a decent wage. That's what a lot of people are just asking for. They want to be treated with dignity, respect as an employee, and get a decent wage. That's all a lot of people ask for. But these are the politicians, these are the people, these are the monsters that purposely stab you in the back for the corporate estate. They're doing favors for their private equity buddies. Not for you, not for the country, not for the economy, but for their lobby buddies. It is absolutely sickening to see that. And I saw this too. So apparently, it's not even the temporary foreign worker program that's the problem here. It's other programs in related to this. So Dominion Society of Canada puts this chart out. And they said the TFW program, temporary foreign worker program, is just a small part of our temporary migrant problem. Ending this isn't going to fix it. And they also mention about the green, which is the study permits. So that's your students, your international students that go to college, they come here to get an education. I'm not against it. If someone actually genuinely wants to come and contribute and get an education here, again, if they're willing to do it legally and they're willing to abide by the laws, abide by, our ways here in this country, I have no problem with international students. I have no problem with people coming into this country to get an education. But I do have a problem when colleges deliberately shun out eligible Canadian students purposely to get international students. Why? Because international students have to pay more. They have to pay more in tuition, which means more money for the college. That's a scam. That's a scam that needs to be stopped. So I'm hoping that's what they mean in this chart here, that the study permit scam needs to be stopped. And this big one in red at the end here, this is the International Mobility Program. And it says, you could look there, over 1.8 million people in through this program. Now, I don't know enough about the International Mobility Program. I'll have to look into further details of this, but you know, all these different entities, these agencies that, again, it makes just more troublesome for the nation. And that's why people went out and protest. That's why people are speaking out about mass migration. It's not because they're racist. It's not because they're bigots all of a sudden. It's because mathematically and economically and for the sake of the country, it's not feasible. We can't have a functioning society if we're pouring in more people than Canada can manage or maintain. You know, we have services right now that are barely keeping up. We have hospitals that are shutting down because they're underfunded. We have, you know, schools that have way too many kids per classroom. And you want to flood more people into that situation? You think that's going to help the situation? How about the over 7% unemployment rate in the country? Canadians are struggling to make their basic needs met and find work. So you think more people is going to solve that? You think bringing in more people that don't understand our ways, our values, our laws, you think that's going to help resolve that, or is it going to make it worse? So, according to NDTV, this is just recently, Canada has rejected 80% of Indian student visas in 2025 so far. Canada's strict visa regime has left many Indian students looking at other options, with Germany emerging as one of them. So that's the student visas. And I'm glad that, you know, they're starting to catch on to the scam that colleges are exploiting these young migrants and taking their money for an education, thinking they're going to get educated, but a lot of these colleges just take the money in a money laundering transaction. A lot of them take it from NGOs that are promoting these international students. So I'm glad that this is being, you know, tracked down. Again, I have no problem if someone's willing to go the legal loophole, if someone's willing to go legally through the channels to actually become a student and actually legally obtain a student visa to get an education in this country. I have no problem with that. But I do have a problem with exploitation. I do have a problem when the country is at a tipping point right now and the economy is worse than it was years ago. And the fact that unemployment's skyrocketing and all these companies are, you know, crying out, we can't find workers. We can't find workers. Well, obviously, there's a disconnect there. Obviously, there's a problem. When you have lineups at unemployment offices and you can't get an appointment, obviously, there's a problem. And for the Canadian government and for the provinces, because even Doug Ford's guilty of this, pouring in people because they think that having these people in is going to help make things more productive and get things on track, is adding more fuel to this fire. And that's why people are protesting. That's why people are angry. That's why the UK had protests over the weekend. Toronto, Christy Pitts had protests over the weekend. Not racism. It's mathematically, we don't have the means to incorporate everybody into this. And we have seen the rise in crime. We have seen the rise of drug trafficking, human smuggling. We have seen so many instances that's making the country less and less safe to be in. And because of the fact that we're pouring in so many people and we don't have the services to allocate the mass influx of the population. So I'm glad they're cracking down on student visas, but that, again, that's only a teeny tiny portion of the major problem.